Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is our final seminar of our seminar series. And I know everybody is really excited, so I will keep this short and sweet. Today, we're really happy to have Jamie Bruce with us to talk about smallmouth and largemouth bass fishing. So Jamie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. Jamie Bruce here. Thanks for taking time out of your, I'm sure, busy Friday afternoon to check this out. So what I'm going to talk about today mostly is going to be bass fishing in the time relating to bassing for bucks and soon arrows. There's a few different things that happen this time of year, and we've pretty much broken it down into 4 different programs that'll be, that'll play in the tournament. And if you're not fishing the tournament and just want to get into bass fishing, then there'll be some good info for you in here as well. We're going to keep it relatively simple. I will try not to get too technical. There will be an option at the end to ask questions. So just write them down if you hear something, and I'll do my best to answer at the end. So I do have to apologize. I meant to do this out of my boat in my garage and have rods and everything as visual aids, but I don't have enough service out there, so I just kind of did a last minute presentation here where I'm going to use some video as reference and some photos as well. So just bear with me when I go in between things here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is shallow smallmouth. Most people, when they think of smallmouth bass, they think shallow, rock, weeds, and that can be true in Whitefish Bay and in Soon Arrows and the surrounding bays this time of year. There's still a lot of fish up shallow. They're always a major player in the tournament. It seems to be the nicer it is out, the more the shallow smallmouth will play. So I hope you can see this screen. This is a map. It's the mouth of a bay. This is on Lake of the Woods. So this is kind of what you're looking for. You can see this long 4-footer stick out. And you'll see that it's connected to deep water. So that's where you want to be right now. You don't want to be on the little rocks in the backs of the bays. Even though the fish are shallow, most of them want to be close to deep water. That's where the best eats are right now. So you'll look around at all the structure, and the best way to do it is to fish fast with something like Rapala X-Wrap, any kind of jerk bait like that. So what you do is you hop from spot to spot in an area you think will be decent for bass, and you really just fish bass until you'll either start seeing them or you'll start catching a couple. So I'll just play this video. This is actually from the spring, but it still applies to this time of year, and it'll just give you an idea of how you properly work a jerk bait, because it's not just as simple as chuck and wind. So you can see there, I just casted it out, reeled it down, and then you'll see, and you have to match this cadence lots. You'll see I'm twitching the rod, twitch, twitch, pause. There, that one bit it. I'll fight it in here. Okay. I'll try to show you a little bit better on this next one. You can see he ate it. He hit it right in the middle. But anyway, make a big long cast here. You can use a spinning rod or a bait caster. Fire it out there, let it hit, and then see that where I just pulled it down a little, that gets it tracking. And then it's just twitch, twitch, pause, and that varies by the day. See that? So there's a fish behind this that's probably been chasing it for a while. And you'll see he didn't react until the bait started to turn up at the boat. So that's just one thing with jerkbait fishing. It's definitely something you want to practice, but it's the most effective way to catch a bass on Lake of the Woods and any lake around here, no matter what season. If I was only given one bait to catch 5 bass on, any day of the year, I'd pick some form of jerkbait. If you're not looking to use a jerkbait and want to try something that's a little more just kind of like a chuck and wind bait, then these plastic swim baits are the best, just on an 1/8 to 1/4 ounce jig head. Fish it in the same areas as the jerk bait, but all you have to do is chuck it out there and wind it in. You won't get as great of a reaction bite, but if there's fish around that are willing to eat, they're going to engage with you. So that's another weapon on the shallow front, and it works out deep too. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So once you find these things when you're fishing fast, you'll usually catch a few. I call them dumb ones. Some people call them active ones. You'll catch a few, but you're not going to be able to sit on a spot, even if it has 30 bass on it, with a jerkbait and catch one every cast. It just isn't realistic. So usually you catch a few of the active ones, and then what I like to do is go back over and throw something like a Z-Man hula stick or a tube or any kind of finesse, slower bait. And you almost always pick a few more off. So you can see this is the same spot where I just caught those ones with the jerkbait. And then there's a slug sitting around on the bottom. Some fish just aren't as active as others. And that little 1-2 punch is a really good way to put some more in the boat. Oh, sorry. Technical difficulties here. Okay. So that is a basic plan for shallow smallmouth. The water's mostly clear around Narrows. You often have to change what kind of depth you're in depending on what bay you're in. Say if you're somewhere like the back of Lobstick where it's generally shallower and dirtier water, then the fish will typically be a little bit hot. You might catch them in 2 to 3 feet. But if you're out in the middle of Whitefish Bay, shallow fishing would be considered 8 to 10 feet. So it depends a lot on clarity, and shallow is a really relative term. But if you're fishing the tournament and just want to catch some fish, it's very seldom won this way on shallow smallmouth, but you can get into the top 10. You can catch a limit every day, and it's the most fun for, kids or people that maybe don't have as much bass fishing experience, or if you don't have all the electronics and all that, then just grab a jerk bait, a swim bait, and a Ned rig and run anywhere that looks good. Rock piles, long points at the mouth of bays, bouldery shorelines, anything like that. So we are, once I get this figured out, going to move on to something a little bit more technical, talking about deep smallmouth. So, sorry. Every year around early August, there's a large concentration of bass that slide out deeper than you would expect to see smallmouth in the summer. And this number increases as the year goes on. So early August, there's a few of them out there. September is kind of mid-transition. They're just starting to flood out there. And by October, it's probably fair to say 80 to 90% of the smallmouth population is in some sort of deep offshore structure situation. So I don't know if you can see my pointer on here, but I'll try it anyway. You can see something like this spot. It's a long point that drops out into deep water. There's 38, 40 feet there. So that's good. And this may be a spot where you've caught them shallow on a jerk bait on top of it, or shallow on a swim bait on top of it. But as the year progresses and you get into the colder nights, they'll start to slide off these ends of the structure. And you really have to change your techniques. You're totally focused on your grafts this time of year. So one thing I like to do, there's a lot of structure on Lake of the Woods. So it can be a little bit intimidating to break it all down. So one thing I like to do is use a swim bait, like the same swim bait I mentioned earlier, except with a bigger head, like a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce head on heavier tackle. And you'll see in the video here, this is a way offshore spot. So I'm going to throw it out there. That's what I'm fishing. And I'm going to let it sink all the way to bottom. That's the key with this. A lot of people want to throw it out there and just reel it in like you're fishing shallow, because, you know, that's probably the way they've been taught, and that's how bass fishing has been forever. But now in the last 10 years or so, it's really changing out there. So let it go to bottom all the way, and it's just a slow wind. So you want that bait just creeping along the bottom, and more often than not, the fish will just follow it for a bit, and they'll get a little deeper and they'll react and eat it. And it's a lot of fun. This is so much fun. I use straight 12-pound fluorocarbon for this. You can use braid too with a leader. The fluoro is just the best because it sinks. All the line sinks, where braid tends to rise up higher. So the fluorocarbon keeps your bait down there longer. So this is a way to get a really good fish too. Like that's a pretty nice smallmouth there. One of the bigger ones in the school, the most active. So you can see that swim bait. It's on a great big head. My hand's hiding it. But that's a really good starter bait. You know, once you drive around and grab some fish and throw it up there, that's a really good starter bait. The walleyes kind of leave it alone most of the time. So it's a good way to just find if there's some bass around. So usually do a few casts with that. Once you've located where a concentration of bass are, you'll see them on your fish finder. I'll show you here what they look like, I think. Let's see. Okay. So you can see those lines. The top line is actually my bait. It's a 5-inch Z-Man minnow, and I'm holding it about 7 feet off the bottom right now. And this is I can't really call it a secret anymore because it's become popular. But 8 or 9 years ago in Bass for Bucks, there were only a few people doing this, or a few teams doing it. And what you do is you just hold it there dead still and silently hover it over these fish, and they just slowly rise up to it or fly at it and smash it. A lot of times if you're bouncing it around and jigging it and then reeling it, they'll leave it alone. They just want that subtle, that nothing movement. So you can see here, they're coming up to it, boom, he ate it. And I am not I'm not moving at all. As little movement as possible. So you can see the bait there. It's just on a jig head. It's a 5-inch Z-Man minnow. It's called a jerk shad. That's a smelt color. It's a really popular one to use, especially in the Sioux Narrows area. They're mostly eating smelt. If you're gonna fish deep on Lake of the Woods, you have to have that bait. That's the staple. It's the deal. So one really good thing about that bait too is it stretches, so it doesn't wear every fish. So you'll watch here, we'll pop that bait out, and I just put a little bit of glue on the head and it stays on there forever, just a quick readjust. And you can see how fast I'm moving, because these big pods of fish, once you get them fired up, you want to get back down there immediately. They don't know what's going on yet. The one I just released hasn't gone down there and messed up the school yet. So this is when you do your damage. We've caught some of our limits in Bass for Bucks in a window of 3 or 4 minutes, just for getting back there, staying on the spot, and just really taking advantage of the situation. So I got the thumbs up there, signaling the camera that there's a school on its way back up. So yeah, won't take long. Get another one, catch it as quick as you can. And in this video is in the spring. I'm in my older boat. It doesn't have a spot lock equipped trolling motor, so I'm especially panicked to get back on that troller and stay on the spot. The Minn Kota Ultrex, Tarova, and Altera, and some of the power drives all have the spot lock feature, and it is an absolute game changer when you're out deep. And it's not here, you can see it's not a very windy day, and the wind, it really will save you. It is honestly one of those things that makes a difference between catching a 13-pound bag and a 19-pound bag. So definitely, if you can, try to get one of those. Oh, yeah, here's a big one, and this is a good way to catch really big fish too. Usually the little bit more educated ones take a little longer. And you know, this fish is over 4 pounds. If we were in bassing for bucks, my partner would be screaming over with the net. So that is a swim bait, a jerk minnow. And one thing we've learned just in the last few years, any bait that works well shallow works well out deep to a certain degree. So we've really been playing with a lot of things, you know, deep crankbaits, deep diving jerk baits, other things like a spy bait. So this, just kind of learned this this spring. The spy bait's typically been a shallow water sand style kind of bait, you know, for fishing around 6 feet. Well, just found out this spring that this thing's a weapon too. You just get a little bit of a heavier model, throw it out there, and you know, I'll show you how to fish it. You can see how slow I'm reeling. And I'm just, oh, technical difficulties. You can see just how slow I'm reeling, and this is over a really deep spot, so I want it to stay down there. And there's something about that bait that it just triggers really hard to catch fish. So I'll show you what it looks like here. Sorry, like I said, I'm not all that organized, but swim bait. Okay. I'll play this particular model is a Duo Realis. There it is there. Spin bait 90. So these come in a deep water version, and what they are, they're just heavier. So my partner really got into using that in deep tournaments. So it's just something different, and it just shows you there's a few different ways to catch them out deep. You don't have to be right exactly under your boat or anything like that. You can cast, you just have to let it go down a little further, which, you know, can be tougher than it sounds. The immediate reaction is just to reel in right away. So a couple other tips for fishing for deep smallmouth. Mapping is super important. I can't stress this enough. So this is the original lake chart we've been using for 20 years on Lake of the Woods or longer in paper charts. It's really vague. It left a lot up to the imagination in the past. So this chip called a Lake Master, they've surveyed all of Lake of the Woods now and have put it all into 1 foot contours. So it doesn't sound like a huge deal, but this is the same spot. I'll just show you the difference. So there's Navionics and there's Lake Master. So you can see in a deep fishing situation how much this would help. You can look over here on this long point where it says 25 on the end. You know, I go back to Navionics and it's just a big, vague, flat spot. So when I'm fishing deep, I know I'm going to want my cast to exactly connect with that little point, because you're just playing the odds. That's where you want your cast to land. It's the most likely place to hold a fish on this spot. So Humminbird Lake of the Woods version 2.0 is the one to get. That is so important. Your graphs, you'll see people with 12-inch, multiple 12-inch graphs on their boat. If you just want to get into it, you can start with Helix 5s, as long as they have some sort of mapping, and you set up your sonar so it's not all fuzzy. You want to be able to see your jig. That's super important. And like I said, it can be a small investment to get started. Don't be intimidated by a bunch of graphs on someone's boat, because like in my little camp boat, I can do the same as I can in my big boat. So give that a shot. Like I said, don't let it intimidate you. So maybe we'll just take five, not five, but I'll open it up for questions while we're on smallmouth, just so we don't get too sidetracked. I'm not sure if Heather can hear me, and maybe she can set it up here. Chat. Oh.
So everybody's able to unmute themselves if you have a question. There is I believe a hand raise function in the chat as well, if you'd rather use that. But at this time, you can, if you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, sorry, Jimmy, you're on mute. There we go.
If there's no questions, it doesn't look like there are. Okay, I'll just keep going. And if you think of something later, then just ask at the end. We're going to move on to talking about largemouth, which is a little bit simpler than the deep smallmouth thing. That's kind of a lot of information to process. But we'll jump right into largemouth, because they are the other factor in bass and for bucks. They have accounted for the last 3 tournament wins, I believe, and almost all largemouth won last year. Brian and Bree had good fish every day. I think they only had 1 smallmouth over the weekend. So largemouth are really important in winning this tournament. Jeff Gustafson, I think it was the year before, won it, and he had a bunch of largemouth too. So largemouth are a little bit, I don't want to say simpler, because they are harder to catch. There's way less of them than there are smallmouth in Lake of the Woods. But what happens is their home range is really small. They will pretty much stick within a couple miles of a bay a lot of the time. So they're really easy for anglers to pressure them, because everyone wants a big largemouth to weigh in. So they are, and there's way less of them. They are harder to catch, but a lot of the times the risk is worth the reward. So this isn't in Sioux Narrows. This is a bay up by Kenora. I'm just using it as an example to keep everything fair in Sioux Narrows. But largemouth frequent these big, giant. These big, giant bays. Lily pads, reeds, things like that. So most of the summer and the spring, they're shallow in these bays. And even leading into bass and for bucks, there are still some out shallow. So I'll kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about there. Oh, maybe not. Sorry, more technical. So here's kind of what we're looking at. This is a shallow reed situation. I'm flipping a creature style bait here and using really heavy gear and really leaning into them. you can see like I'm flipping into zero water almost and just looking for a reaction bite. So I'm in very similar to the smallmouth. And this is a bad example because it's raining here, but the nicer it is, the more likely these largemouth are to stay in these spawning bays. So you can flip for them or you can frog for them are pretty much your two main options when they're shallow. So here's another look at a frogging situation. It's shallow lily pads. There's a shallow tree in there. And same thing, big rod, big hook set. You want to muscle it to the boat as fast as you can. And this is a really good way to catch a big bass too. It can be kind of needle in a stack, especially in Soon Arrows where the largemouth numbers have been kind of declining over the years, really. But that's how you target them. It's that simple. You need a hollow body frog and some sort of flipping bait, like a 1/2 ounce tungsten weight with a big heavy hook and a creature bait like a Z-Man palmetto bug is one you can look up. So I'm just going to go back to the map here. I'm starting to get the hang of this thing, I promise. Oh, maybe not. Uh-oh. Okay, so we'll go back to the map. So say it's late August and there's a cold snap like there is today. It's a premium example. So these largemouth aren't going to want to be back in the lily pads and in the reeds and super shallow. So they're going to pull out to areas like you can see in this mouth here. You'll see this little structure, this rock that sticks off. If there's any trees on the bank leading into the bay, you're looking for bright green coontail weeds, boulders, rocks, places you'd really look for spring smallmouth in. When it gets cold, these largemouth start piling out, and by October, there won't be a fish left in this huge weed bay. So you definitely target them a little different when they're on the outs, as we call it. You'll hear people say the ins and the outs, and that just means whether they're in the bays or out in the mouth of the bays. So this thing right here is probably claimed, not this one, but a Senko style bait is probably claimed more largemouth and bass and for bucks than any other bait, and not probably at 100% has. So you just take one of these, you can rig it however you like, you can flip it, wacky rig it, and that's a really safe bet to throw on all these outer spots. You'll see it right away. You'll start catching some bass. Another option for moving a little faster is a flipping jig. This thing's a classic. It's the oldest largemouth bait in the book. You can cover a lot more water, and once you find a few on this, then you can slow down and use that Senko. In higher pressured areas, it's a little harder to get away with the flipping jig, typically because the bass are a little more sensitive. They want something a little more natural. But some days you can really light it up on this, and that's one you always want to have in your boat. So, and largemouth, you kind of just have to do it. It's really easy to get discouraged just because the numbers are so low compared to smallmouth. But one thing I used to do is just leave all the smallmouth rods at home and just target largemouth and stick with it all day, and you'll find that they are catchable. You can get limits of them, and they're not these unicorns that they are sometimes made out to be. So that's it. That should be enough to get you started. Any questions, let them fly. I'm here to answer them. So
I think there are definitely some questions. I'm just gonna see, I think we're having some troubles unmuting, so I'm gonna see if I can get everybody unmuted.
Okay.
If you are unmuted and have a question, feel free to ask.
What about ice fishing smallies?
Ice fishing smallies. This is really controversial topic. So I used to do it when I was younger. What happens with smallmouth is, like I said, into the fall, they all get out deeper, and by October, they're all in their wintering spots. So this is typically a 25 to 30-foot hump where 90% of the bass in the lake will be, or in that area of the lake. In early ice and late ice, so pretty much December and March or April, they're really easy to catch because you can find these spots and drop just about anything in front of them and they'll bite it. So I used to do this when I was in high school, and I thought it was the coolest thing, catching bass for the ice. And a few more seasoned tournament anglers told me that it's really hard on them. And I didn't get it at first, but it makes a little more sense now. So they don't, they're really lethargic in the winter. They don't eat much at all. So a fight to the surface in 30 feet really gasses them. Uses a lot of their energy reserves. And I'm not a biologist. This is just what I've seen and read and heard. And so on top of that, they can get the bends. Barotrauma is the more specific term, but it's from coming up from too deep, shallow, and they fill up with air. They can't adjust their air bladder in time, and they're unable to be released. So I don't do it as a rule. I try to discourage it. It is doable, and I understand there's some shallower, different lakes where you can get away with it. You don't have to catch them deep or anything. But that's my spiel on ice fishing smallmouth. Any other questions?
We'll give everybody just a couple
Sure.
more minutes, but it looks like those who want to unmute are able to, and I'm not seeing anything in the chat. No questions. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for a very informative presentation today. I found it interesting, and I think that everybody else has as well. I'm just seeing some comments here that there's some troubles unmuting, so I'll give it.
Okay.
There, I've hopefully, is anybody who wants to unmute able to? There we go. Okay, so if you have a question, I think everybody can unmute now. Are there any more questions?
I only got here about 3 minutes ago. How do you catch big bass? 20
Go
seconds
on.
bass.
Say your question one more time.
How do you catch big bass in 20 seconds or less? Since I got here late.
Wait a day. Go back onto the Soon Arrows Nestor Falls tourism website and rewatch the video.
Sounds good.
And throw a Senko around in Soon Arrows.
All right.
The video will be posted. I send it right after, so it's usually up by tomorrow.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
No problem.
What's your PB?
My PB?
Yeah.
In 2015, my wife and I went to Lake Chickamauga in Tennessee, and I caught an 8-pound, 15-ounce largemouth there on a crankbait. The second day on the lake, we had no idea what we were doing, and we only caught 3 bass that day, and that was one of them. So that was my biggest one in the south. My biggest one on Lake of the Woods was 7.04 pounds, and I caught it off a tree. The tree had we had caught 2 little ones off it pre-fishing for a tournament, and thinking, not thinking, I flipped back in there and I set the hook and almost broke my back on this thing. So that was my biggest one. That wasn't in Soon Arrows, but my partner in Bass and for Bucks actually caught a 7-pounder a week before the tournament in Soon Arrows, which these don't happen. You hear 7-pounder thrown out, lots, and these are the only 2 I've ever seen that are weighed and verified. So if you catch a 7-pounder, definitely get a replica made. I made the mistake of not doing it, so I'll probably never see another one.
What about Smallie?
Well, same thing. The biggest one is south of the border. Caught a 660 in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. Haven't really had anything that close to that here. Black Sturgeon Lake, I caught one close to 6 a few years ago. And Lake of the Woods, I've heard of 6-pounders. I've seen people catch them. I've never caught one that big on Lake of the Woods. So there's a chance at Bass for Bucks every year that someone's going to catch one of those. It's a matter of time. It's happened before too.
Have you ever fished longbow?
Yeah, I actually, when I was a kid, my parents used to have a cabin there. And when I was younger, the smallmouth fishing was decent. And as I became an adult, I totally forgot about it and went fishing there a few years ago. And all of a sudden, there's a bunch of largemouth in there. So that's pretty awesome. That lake's got more weeds than anywhere in northwestern Ontario. So they've got lots of places to hide and grow. And I suspect if the pressure remains limited, that it's going to be one of the better lakes to fish around here for largemouth in the coming years.
Yeah, I live there, and the Smallie fishing is pretty bad, but there's a lot of good largies.
Yeah, totally different than when I was a kid. So I'd rather have largemouth in my backyard anyway. So consider yourself lucky to live out there.
There's some big ones too.
Absolutely, yeah, and they're going to keep growing.
If there aren't any more questions, then I think we'll wrap it up. Am I missing one? No, the presentation, like I said, will be available. So if you want to rewatch it, you didn't quite catch something, on the Sport Fishing Center website. They usually post it within 24 hours. And again, thank you very much, Jamie, for your wonderful presentation. And thank you to everybody for joining us for our summer seminar series. We look forward to doing more of these larger presentations in person next year.
Thanks everyone for watching. Thanks Heather for having me on here, and hope to see everyone soon. Good fishing.
Thank you.